Hi, I'm Pastor Tom Rice from Cranford Alliance Church, and I want to thank you for tuning in to watch a portion of our Sunday worship service. You know, at Cranford Alliance, we are a Christ-centered family that is seeking, growing, and going. We are seeking God's presence, we are growing God's people, and we are going with God's love to our neighbors and to the world. If you'd like to find out more, you can find us on the web at cranfordalliance.org, our Facebook page, or even our YouTube channel. Now I pray that you'll be encouraged by the message that you hear. Again, thank you, and God bless you.
All right. Well, welcome. We have a special guest today. Michelle and Brian Davis are here to share what's happening inside of New York City, especially with the West Africans. And Brian was here last year, October time, and they've come on occasion to share what's going on within the international work that's inside of New York City. So as we know, New York City is an international melting pot, and it's a perfect place to reach out to those that are from around the world, to be able to have them reach out into their cultures and into their people groups. So Michelle's here, and she's going to share. And so would you come and share what the Lord has for us?
So it was a Saturday afternoon several years ago, and I called my husband, who had...
Is it on?
I don't know. I think so.
Yep, you got a green light.
And I called my husband, who had been rock climbing for the day with a bunch of scouts, my kids' scout troop, and just to ask him when he'd be coming back into the city. And he seemed kind of frazzled and in a hurry to get off the phone. And I said, you know, what's going on? Was it a good day? You know, what time will you be home? And he said, I have to go. And I said, why? What's the hurry? He said, I can't find Josiah. I said, what do you mean you can't find Josiah? I don't understand. And he said, Michelle, I have to go. I cannot find Josiah. He got separated from us, and I need to go find him. And so we hung up, and it was just me and Jacob actually home that day. And it was a frightening feeling for a mom to have her son lost in the woods. But what was so interesting about the story, obviously he became found, but was that he just got separated. He kind of took the wrong trip back from from the top of the cliff down to the bottom. But he kept going further and further and further away from being found. And he even passed people who could have helped him, but he didn't reach out to ask. It was as though maybe he was confident that, you know, just around the next corner, I'm going to find my dad in the group, you know, so I'm just going to keep going. And so it started to get dark, and still no Josiah. He kept going further and further. And it wasn't actually until lots of people were now looking for Josiah that somebody came to him. Series of situations, but somebody came to him and said, are you lost? People are out looking for you. And he said, yes. It wasn't until somebody moved toward him to find him. He would not have been able to find his way on his own. And so that story is just a parallel for some of what I want to share this morning. We're going to start in John 10, verses 1 through 16. And this passage, let's see if this works. Maybe. Can you just advance the slide? I'm just going to read the passage. We'll find the slides in a minute, maybe. So John 10 is the story of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So it starts, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs up in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes out ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they would never follow a stranger. In fact, they would run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. So Jesus, in this passage, he's speaking to the Pharisees. He shares this metaphor about the shepherd, the sheep, and a thief and a robber. Sheep and shepherds were very common in biblical times, so that everyone listening would have a picture of what this was like. Everybody had their own sheep, or their neighbor had a sheep. They understood the imagery really easily. Jesus uses this everyday common language to tell people to communicate who he is and who we are. Interestingly, the very first profession in the Bible, in Genesis 4, verse 2, is a shepherd. It's the first thing that we hear listed professionally. And there are hundreds of references to sheep. They're mentioned all over the Bible. Sheep were sacrificed in biblical times. Sheep provided meat, wool, milk. They were used in the temple system of sacrifices, like I mentioned. Even our cleansed sin was compared to the whiteness of sheep. Isaiah 1:18 says, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red as crimson, they shall be like wool, the wool of a sheep. Sheep are often mentioned in connection to a shepherd in Scripture, and this is with good reason. Sheep are, interestingly, completely dependent upon their shepherd to bring them places so they can eat, so they can drink, so they can rest. They also need the shepherd to keep them from danger. If a sheep were lost, just like Josiah, it would never be able to find its way back. One commentary I actually read says that none, referring to the sheep, is so incapable of finding its way back to a flock when once gone astray as sheep. Because of this, a shepherd needs to go looking for sheep when they're lost. They just simply are incapable of finding their way back, which just like Josiah was in this particular story. When we lived in Senegal, it never ceased to amaze me that goats were let out of people's homes at the beginning of the day and made their way back to their people's homes at the end of the day with no difficulty. Not so with sheep. They had to be tied up, they had to be let out by the owner, and if they accidentally came untied and wandered even just a few hundred feet from their home, they were unable to get back. Completely unable. Interestingly, Jesus compares us to sheep, but we'll get to that in a minute. Throughout this passage, Jesus is calling us to three things that I see in the text: to follow him, to follow him who is the shepherd in these three ways: to intimacy with him, to a lifestyle of sacrifice, and to seek and save the lost. Jesus doesn't just tell us that he is our shepherd in this passage, but twice he tells us that he's a good shepherd. He's not just any shepherd, he's a good shepherd. In fact, he's the best shepherd. There's no one else who can even come close to how he protects us, to how he provides for us, to how he can heal our souls. And not only is he a good shepherd, but he speaks to us. You see in this passage, he's speaking to his sheep. There's like this interaction going on. We can hear his voice, and it's super clear here that we can distinguish it from a stranger's voice. It's completely clear that when the shepherd speaks to the sheep are tuned to his voice and not to the stranger's voice. Do you know what Jesus' voice sounds like? Is it familiar? Or do we have too much noise in our lives to hear the shepherd's voice? Are there voices that we maybe need to eliminate so that we can hear the voice of the shepherd more clearly? Sometimes we just have too much noise, too much distractions, and we can't hear Jesus' voice. Often and sometimes that noise is external to us, right? Some of us have children and work and whatnot that's very loud, and some of that noise is internal to us. Sometimes it's the lies that we believe, the things that are going on in our head, the worries, the different things in our mind. So the noise could be either. But often when we slow down and remove distractions and sit with Jesus, we can hear his voice again. If you aren't sure if you're hearing Jesus' voice, remember that the voice of the shepherd is gentle. It's never harsh. If you hear a harsh voice and you think it's coming from the Lord, it's not. He does correct us, he does discipline us, but he does it with gentleness and kindness. His voice convicts, it doesn't condemn. It brings clarity, not confusion, and it instills hope and not despair. The voice of our good shepherd is so much better than all the other voices. Do you believe it? Is his voice sweeter in your life than the other competing voices? And what's more, it's not just that he speaks to us, but he calls us by name. He knows the names of sheep. I didn't do this research, but it's striking me right now. I don't know people named sheep or distinguished between them in biblical times or even in modern times, but our shepherd knows us by name. In verse 14 and 15, Jesus says, I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. Jesus describes this mutual relationship of knowing and being known. But further, he describes that our relationship with him is just like the Father's relationship with Jesus. As I was preparing this message, I just sat in that concept for a long time, just struck by this incredible comparison, right? Like if you think of the Trinity, the three are in union, they're so connected, and yet our Good Shepherd says that we can be in that union with the Father in the same way. It's incredible. What it means is that we can have a whole lot more depth in our relationship with God than we currently have. There's more, and it's not God who's holding back. It's not God who's not making space for the relationship, because he always has space. So in this passage, we see that the shepherd not only knows the sheep and talks to the sheep, but he leads the sheep out. He brings them out of their pen, right? And some animals are, I can't remember the word, but are led from behind. You know, they're driven out to fields or to places, but not so with sheep. Sheep are moved out of their pen, and then the shepherd goes in front, and the sheep follow. created to be followers. We don't know the way to go. We think we do. We like to think that we have the best plan, but we don't know the best way. We don't know the path that leads to thriving. We need a shepherd. Let's consider for a moment where Jesus leads the sheep. He leads them to pastures for sustenance, for refreshment, for rest. Psalm 23, which is familiar to all of us, talks about the Lord as a good shepherd who leads the sheep to green pastures where they can lie down and rest. He leads the sheep to quiet waters. And I learned while preparing this that sheep are actually afraid of choppy, rapid waters. And the shepherd knows that. And he leads them to a place where they can get the most rest, not to a place where it's difficult for them to rest. God knows just what we need, and he knows what's best for us. And he desires to give us what's best for us. What's more, the shepherd lingers with the sheep. He doesn't just walk them out to the pasture and say, like, hang out here all day. I'll be back later. I'm going to go do my other work. He hangs out with the sheep while they rest. He rests with them. He wants to refresh our souls. Intimacy with the shepherd creates safety and trust. If we have no reason to trust in the safety, then we certainly can't trust in risk. So we need to trust our good shepherd when we feel like we're in places of safety and he's bringing us to places of safety. And as we trust him in that, then when he asks us to do something risky and step out, we have confidence because he has been trustworthy. We've been trustworthy and developed that trust. Do we trust that Jesus, as our good shepherd, knows what's best? That he knows what he's doing? Do we believe that he's writing a good story in our lives? I mean, certainly there are times that I think that I could, I obviously mistakenly think I could give God some good recommendations, some advice. It never turns out very well. But that goes back to me thinking that somehow the good shepherd doesn't quite have it all together, doesn't quite remember all the details, right? That goes back to my lack of trust. Do we trust that the shepherd can be trustworthy, that he's writing a good story? Do we believe that he wants us to rest and to provide for us? Can we let Jesus lead us to green pastures and to quiet waters? We are not called just to intimacy with Jesus. We are called to that. But we are also called to this lifestyle of sacrifice. 3 times in John 10, Jesus comments that he lays down his life for the sheep, which is in sharp contrast to the hired hand, right? The hired hand runs away as soon as danger comes. Like, forget it, I'm not paid enough in this job to hang around with these sheep, I'm out of here. But no, the good shepherd lays down his life. Shepherds in biblical times protected sheep from wild animals, often putting themselves in danger. For example, in Genesis, we see that Jacob endured temperature extremes and exhaustion to take care of his sheep. We see that David killed a lion and a bear to protect his sheep. That's pretty significant work. Jesus obviously models the most significant sacrifice in coming as a baby, living on earth and then going to the cross. Jesus laid down his life for those who don't have access to the Father. He came as a shepherd, right? He came as a shepherd, and then he became the sheep, right? It was just this role reversal. He came as the good shepherd, and he is the good shepherd, and then as a shepherd, he sacrificed himself like the Passover lamb, our Passover lamb. He became the Passover lamb. So he's both the good shepherd and lays down his life as a sheep. Are we willing to sacrifice for those who don't know the Father? Are we willing to lay down our lives in a similar way? most of us probably will not be called to lay down our lives as a martyr, though there are probably people across the world today who are laying down their lives today. There continue to be many people who are martyred for their faith around the world. But most of us probably won't be martyrs if we continue to live in the U.S., but it doesn't mean we're not called to sacrifice. Jesus calls us to do the things that he did and even greater things. When we were living in Senegal, brief slide of Tabaski. This is the Muslim holiday of Eid, and it was such an amazing opportunity to talk about the sacrifice of the sheep and to talk about Jesus being the sacrificial lamb. So we had the opportunity to join with our neighbors and our friends in their most important holiday, the most important Muslim holiday, and it was just this perfect moment to talk about Genesis 22, Abraham and God providing a sacrifice in the Old Testament, common ground. And yet, this continues to be a holiday celebrated. Just several months ago, my friends and their families were celebrating this holiday of Eid because they are unaware that the Passover lamb has already been sacrificed. And so this was an amazing parallel. Like, yes, you're continuing to sacrifice a sheep for your sins, but the sacrifice has already been made. And as I was sitting with this neighbor, this is many, many years ago, because our children are very young here, but I recalled back to when in 3rd grade, I felt the Lord call me to go and share with people who had yet to hear about the good news of the gospel. And here I was sitting with my neighbor among people who just didn't know. They were still making sacrifices to a God, to Allah, hoping that that would be acceptable. So what does it mean for us to sacrifice? A lifestyle of sacrifice can mean different things to different people and in different seasons. So I don't necessarily want to suggest how you should sacrifice, but I do want to share a few things that God's been teaching me and see if those are things that perhaps you would want to step into. One thing that is a way to sacrifice is to fast. Fasting to bring transformation. Fasting to bring those who have yet to know Jesus into knowledge of him. I love this passage in Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58 talks about, Isaiah 58:5 says, Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for a man to humble himself. Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable? Is this not the kind of fast I have chosen? Fasting so that you will loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, set the oppressed free, break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? What if you could fast? What if your fasting as a discipline, as a lifestyle of sacrifice, would loose the chains of injustice? Would it be worth it? What if it could untie the cords of the yoke? Think of people who are yoked. I mean, we could make a list of people who are yoked around the world. What if your fasting could untie those things to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? God has been stretching me to press into fasting. Brian has long been a person of fasting, and I've always said, I can't really do that. I can do other things. And then God said to me, let me challenge you. And so that's been a new discipline in the last 6 months, I guess, that I've pressed into. And God it's an interesting discipline because you don't really necessarily see the direct impact, right? It's not like you see like, okay, I see chains falling down, I see people being unyoked. But are we willing to step into something when we don't necessarily see the results, but trust that God will do what he says he's going to do? What about prayer? Does anybody carry a prayer burden for a person or a particular people group or a type of people? Has anybody prayed all night, through the night? I had a conversation with God and I said, I don't understand can't I just pray during the day? All day prayer? All day prayer. And I've never really heard of that, right? All day prayer? No, people have all night prayers. Why? There's something about sacrifice that moves God's heart. Have you considered praying through the night? We have been praying on Fridays at noon on Zoom. Anybody is welcome to join us for the ladies in our ESL and citizenship classes. There were about 30, 40 maybe pre-COVID, and then we switched along with the rest of the world to everything Zoom for a while. And interestingly, that like exploded our ESL and citizenship classes, and now we have a little bit of both. But every Friday we have been contending for God to answer prayer. We've been praying for their salvation. We've been praying for any requests that they give to us. So they know that we're praying, and often on Thursday, Friday morning, they'll ask, today when you're praying, can you pray for these things? Our Muslim friends. We've had 2 ladies recently pass citizenship tests who should not have by any stretch of the imagination, any stretch of knowledge, both of whom I had worked with the night before, and they just really weren't ready. And I even said to one of them, if you pass this exam, it will be God doing something miraculous. Because she knew like 3 words. For the citizenship exam, you have to be able to answer basic questions in English. I don't know if anybody here has taken it, but you have to do some reading, do some writing, and then answer civics questions. For most people in our context, the civics questions they can rote memorize, even if they have no idea what they mean. But the reading and the writing are really challenging. And so I said to her, we will be praying. We will be praying that God would step in and do the miraculous. And I was walking in my neighborhood praying that next day, and I said to God, God, you and I both know that she can't pass this exam today. Like it's really evident. But would you, in your kindness to her, would you let her be seen? Let her know that you see her. Would you step into this situation and do the miraculous? And she called me and she said, Michelle, I passed. And I said, you did? Wow. In fact, I was so surprised and in awe of God's moving. I just blurted out, well, that was all God, because you did not have what it takes to pass the exam. And I said to her, well, what was your sentence? Because it was writing that was going to hold her up. And she said, it was, we pay taxes. And I said, well, that's amazing and miraculous, because that's the only sentence that you knew. So amazing. And we had another lady with a very similar situation. And the interesting thing about this is, so 2 in a row, it was like 1 week and then the next week. And I was like, God, this is amazing. These women feel seen, they feel heard, we're on a roll. Maybe we should like not teach them the content, we should just pray. We should do both. But then we had a lady who I had been working with literally for years, and she was ready. We continued to pray for her, but she could do a lot of the things I was fairly confident that she would pass. And a good friend of mine, and then she called me and she didn't pass. And I was like, God, we were, 2 for 2, what's going on here? And the sentence that she gave me, that she told me that she was given, she had done the night before perfectly. And so I was pretty frustrated with God. I was like, God, I don't understand. But the Lord just said to me, I want you in her home for 2 more months. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I continued to work with her every week. And the day of her exam, I was in the prayer room at our church in the morning, and just really met the Lord, praying with her, praying over her, just weeping over her and her salvation and her passing this exam. And I went down to this, it's in Lower Manhattan, this massive courthouse block. It's like 2 city blocks practically. And I marched around it during the exam and just begged the Lord to let her pass. And she called me, she passed. And just tears came down my eyes. God is so gracious, so faithful to these women. And God, I could tell you stories after story after story of the ways that God has miraculously entered into these women's lives as we have contended in prayer. Some of the answers have come with years of contending, and some come quicker. All that to say is that prayer is a sacrifice, but it moves God's heart. And right in Revelation, one of my favorite verses in Revelation is where you have the golden bowls, the imagery of God collecting our prayers. No prayer goes unheard, unanswered, maybe not answered in the way we would like, but God collects the prayers in the bowls. And then as they overflow, he takes his scepter from the throne and combines it with the prayers and sends fire down to heaven, down to earth, bringing heaven down to earth. Our prayers make a difference. Would you consider sacrificing so that those who don't know the Father could know him? Would it be worth it? Would it be worth the sacrifice? Finally, Jesus calls us to follow him in intimacy, to a lifestyle of sacrifice, and finally to seek and save the lost. In John 10:16, Jesus says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. When he said this, Jesus was specifically referring to the Gentiles, those who were outside the Jewish people's comfort zone, who the Jewish people thought of as the other. Jesus is clear that his purpose in even coming to earth was to seek and save the lost. Luke 19:10 says that. Even the parable in Luke 15 about Jesus leaving the 99 sheep to go and find the lost one. You may be thinking, but wait, the shepherd can't leave the sheep because the sheep will get lost. I already explained that earlier in the sermon, and I had that same question when I thought about the passage. But interestingly, if the sheep are all together out in the wilderness, they will stay together because they must know that they get lost easily. And so the shepherd can leave them for a stretch of time to go find the one. Now, he can't leave them in small groups because that would be disastrous, but all together as one flock, they'll stay together. Anyway, so Jesus leaves the 99 to find the one. And what I love about this is that Jesus doesn't sit there and question whether the one wants to be found. He doesn't say, I wonder if the lost sheep actually wants to be back here. Maybe the lost sheep actually wants to find a new flock, or wants to choose a new lifestyle, a new whatever it is. No, Jesus is confident that better is one day in his courts than anywhere else. From Psalm 84. He knew with complete confidence that if the sheep found him, they were finding the greatest treasure. Do we believe that? Do we believe that Jesus is the greatest treasure? So much so that he's worthy of sharing. That if others were to find him, that they would say too, this is the greatest treasure. I read a quote from a book I was reading about beholding that talks about what we find beautiful and fascinating will ultimately determine what we become. Are we captured by the beauty of Jesus? Do we believe, as the Good Shepherd, as Jesus in this passage believed, that going to find that sheep is not only worthy of being found, but that when found, that sheep would be most happy, most thriving with the rest of the sheep? Another quote, whenever we encounter something beautiful, we automatically share it with people. You don't need to ask people to share what they find fascinating. People respond to beauty by speaking to others about it. It's just instinctive. When we behold Jesus, we become like him and we want to share him. Do we have that? And if we don't, it's okay, because our good shepherd would love to show us himself. He would love to show us his beauty. If we don't find Jesus beautiful, ask, Jesus, show me your beauty. He loves to answer that prayer. A few summers ago, we had several high school groups at Culture Camp, actually this summer as well, and 2 summers ago participating in this week. We brought a bunch of groups together, and we challenged them to a treasure hunting. This is experience where they would pray and ask the Lord to give them clues into people who might be seeking him, who might have hearts that were soft, and then to go out into the neighborhood where they were in their unreached people group focus and see if they find those people. We actually had a story this summer and 2 summers ago of people, high school students, getting these clues. Maybe it was somebody with a yellow shirt, and I don't remember what the other clue was. The other clue had several different physical descriptions of a person. It could be that, or it could be something else. But both of those people were super discouraged that they didn't find somebody that matched that description as they were out on the streets in the afternoon in the parks. And both of those individuals, incidentally, found their person in the airport as they were leaving to go home. And the stories are actually parallel. Each of them went up to that person and got to pray with them in the airport and share some of how God loves to answer prayer. Maybe as we're going after lost sheep, maybe when we get to a lost sheep, like Josiah, at a certain point, he knew he was lost. And when somebody said to him, I know where your dad is, can I help you find your dad? We're out looking for you. You seem like you're the right person. And he said yes. So he, at that point, knew he was lost, and he was delighted to be found and reconnected. But you probably can picture lost sheep, lost people who either don't know they're lost or don't want to be found. So maybe when we come across lost sheep, they know they're lost, and they just need to be shown the way. I'm going to share one little story about that. There was a man several years ago that came to New York City from a West African country, and he had started to hear a little bit about the gospel in his country. And he got a visa to come to the U.S., and he thought, as soon as I get to the U.S., somebody will tell me more about this Jesus, because I'm starting to learn a little bit, and people in the U.S. are, it's a Christian nation, and everybody's a believer, so, people are going to want to share about this. And he was in New York City for 3 months, and probably living in his insulated West African community. But he didn't run into anybody who shared anything about Jesus. And Brian and a colleague were out on the streets walking and praying and interacting with West Africans, and they met this man on the streets in New York City in our neighborhood, and they started chatting with him, and he said, I've been here 3 months just looking for somebody to tell me about Jesus. Can you tell me how to follow him? And they had this amazing opportunity to share the gospel and to pray with him and to mentor and disciple him. So he was lost, and he knew he was lost. And he just needed somebody to show him the way. And yet there are other sheep who don't realize they're lost. They might be content or disillusioned, or think the things that they're chasing after will bring them peace. Or perhaps the sheep might be reluctant when they see the shepherd coming because they're injured or they're sick. And so they're caught and they're tangled, and the thought of being uncaught or untangled doesn't quite feel as safe as just staying stuck. When we step out of our comfort zones, we step into the unknown and we take a risk, right? We don't know. And I imagine shepherds in biblical times, or even in current times, when they get to a sheep that's stuck in a thorn bush, they're going to pull the sheep out, and it's going to be painful for the sheep, right? But the sheep is going to be happier to be reunited with the fold. And so sometimes when we step out and we take a risk, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes people are like, no, I'm really not at all interested. In fact, I'm offended that you would ask. But we never know what we're sowing that may later bear fruit. It's always risky. We just a few weeks ago had kids come, high school students come for a culture camp, and we asked them to take a risk and in several of the groups and interact with people in the park, teenagers, adults who they didn't know. And it was risky for them to step out and to just say, hey, this is my name, and I'm here in the park, would love to hear your story, or would love to pray for you. And yet when they stepped across and took the risk, they had all these opportunities to pray for people, all these opportunities to share the love of Jesus. We had the opportunity to connect. I don't know if you remember 2 Januaries ago, there was a big fire in the Bronx, and 19 people were killed in that fire. All of them were from Muslim backgrounds, all went to a similar mosque, and with a very unreached people group, and God has just opened the doors for us to be able to walk alongside and minister to them. We were, in fact, with several of them last night at an event, and one of the ladies was pointing out, this little girl lost her mom and her sister and her brother, and the lady who was talking herself lost many relatives, and just being able to journey with people to point them to hope. And it's always a kingdom risk. So you are called to follow. You're called by name, by a good shepherd. You're called to follow in intimacy, to a lifestyle of sacrifice, and to risk, to seek and save the lost. And so my question is, what can you do today? What could you do this week? Maybe you need to know that Jesus is a good shepherd today. Maybe that's where you want to start. If, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't feel like you're captured by the beauty of Jesus, then ask him to reveal himself to you. Make space in your life to behold Jesus, to follow the Good Shepherd, to rest, to intimacy. Maybe you can fast this week. Or maybe you can ask God to give you a prayer burden if you don't have one, for a neighbor, somebody around you, or for a whole group of people. Can you pray 1 hour every week for that person or those people who have never heard of Jesus as the Good Shepherd? Where can you cross a language or a cultural boundary? You're welcome to come and teach ESL or citizenship classes with us. Where can you help an immigrant or somebody who's come to the U.S.? Acts 17 says God moves people for his purposes so that some can come to know him. Who are the people that God has moved to your neighborhood or to New York City? There are over 80 unreached people groups with populations of greater than 5,000. Who could you cross a boundary toward? Who do you see in your neighborhood or at work or at school who needs to know that there is a good shepherd and that he's worth following? We have some new colleagues, the Bamogos. They're from Burkina Faso, and they are joining our team. Brian met Jacques, the husband, while he was in New York City trying to learn English, and ultimately he went to Crown to get a degree in biblical studies. And Brian and Jacques got to reach out and share the love of Jesus with bicycle delivery workers in New York City over a season, over a year, and got to see so many unreached West African people hear for the first time about Jesus. They moved last fall to the South Bronx, a neighborhood where there are lots of West Africans, and God even moved them, gave us an apartment for them right across the street from the very first lady that came to our citizenship or ESL classes many, many years ago, who has asked us to please pray. Please pray so that I know whether to follow Jesus or whether to follow Muhammad and his teachings. And so we continue to pray and build relationships. But God brought this new family and put them right across the street from her, and they've been building relationships. And so one of the ways that you could partner or sacrifice with the work that we are doing is to give a special gift to this family as we seek to bring them onto our team, and as they seek to find partners, whether it's a one-time gift or giving in a recurring way. They are looking for partners, and they are people who don't yet have a lot of networks with churches coming from Burkina. And specifically, if anybody would be interested in giving any funds to cover a computer for them, we would be very grateful and are happy to share with you the details of that. But there are other ways that I believe God is calling you to sacrifice, is calling you to seek and save the lost. And so I want to challenge you to just spend 15 minutes asking Jesus today, how is it that you want me to press in? Because God has more for all of us. And so I just want to bless you with this very short blessing. May we all follow in the footsteps of the Good Shepherd to intimacy, to sacrifice, and to seek and save the lost. Thank you.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. us the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. So I will not be shaken. You would be our hope. You would be our strength. Lord, we would reach out to those that are around us. Michelle, would you be willing to give that blessing one more time? And I just want to invite each one of you to coffee hour downstairs, so join us. And would you bless us?
Yes, bless us to rest in the presence of our Good Shepherd, to be drawn into intimacy with Him. May His beauty be more beautiful than all the other things around.
Yeah.
I bless us to step into a lifestyle of sacrifice, because Jesus is worthy of sacrifice. He's worthy of our sacrifice. And I bless us to go and seek and save lost. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Michelle.